Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our authors and their journey series today. We are presenting the author, April Dávila, and she's talking about her book, 142 Ostriches. Ostrich.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, ostrich. And then when you make it plural, it really is a mouthful. So thank you very much, April, for coming. I want to just tell everybody that today's program is going to be recorded and it'll be on the YouTube Pasadena Library. Thanks to April allowing us to do that. You can review it yourself and share it with your friends. Also, if you could please mute yourself. And at the end of the program, we will be having chat questions, a question and answer period with our author. So if you please put your questions in chat and I will ask the questions and we'll start the questions following the program. So we're very honored to have April participate in Authors and Their Journey series. It is a program that the library has been presenting for several years, and we welcome authors, local authors, authors from all over the United States, and authors out of the United States to Zoom with us and present their book to our friends here at the library, and we're very appreciative of that. So I want to tell you a little bit about 142 Ostriches. We have the book in the Pasadena Public Library that you can check out, and also it is available at Vroman's bookstore. The story is set against the unexpected splendor of an ostrich ranch in California desert. April's beautifully written debut conjures an absorbing and compelling heroine in a story of courage, family, and forgiveness. She received her undergraduate degree in biology from Scripps College before going on to study writing at USC. She was a resident of the Dorland Mountain Arts Colony in 2017 and attended the Squaw Valley Community of Writers in 2018. She's also a mindfulness meditation instructor certified by the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley and co-founder of a very important meeting, which hosts virtual meetings for mostly writers and writing students 7 days a week. April and co-founder Paulette Pershaz have plans of building out their schedule until writers can hop on any time of the day and any time zone to focus their minds and write with like-minded individuals. And we'll ask her more about this wonderful program during the chat. In 2019, April's short story Ultra was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. In 2020, 142 Ostriches was published by Kensington Books. She's a fourth-generation Californian. She lives in La Cañada, Flintridge, with her husband and 2 children. She's a practicing Buddhist, half-hearted gardener, and an occasional runner, and obviously a very good author and research as well in order to write this book and tell us about the ostrich farm. So let's welcome April to talk about her book. April?
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind and thorough introduction. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I see a few familiar faces. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Anne. So I was thinking about what I could share with you guys. My book came out in the spring of 2020, which might have been like the worst time in all of history to try to launch a debut novel. But I have the upside of the pandemic was that I did a lot of online events. And so I've done a lot of Zoom book clubs, and I've gotten to Zoom in with groups that I probably would have never been a part of otherwise. So it's actually, all told, it's been not as bad as I had feared when the pandemic first shut everything down. So I was trying to think what I could share with this group that would be maybe a little bit different. And I decided that I'm going to take us on a little bit of a time travel journey and go back and explore my love affair with the desert and how that all got started and how it translated into the setting for my book many, many years later. So I grew up in Northern California. And those of you who are here, I'm assuming you're all fairly local, you know that there's that Northern California, Southern California bias. But I came down to Southern California to go to undergrad at Scripps College in Claremont and didn't really think much about the desert. I think like most people, the desert was just somewhere that you drove through. You like cross your fingers, check the fluid in the radiator and like plow through it. And never really thought much beyond that about it. And then my freshman year, and this would have been in the spring of my freshman year. So I think it was the month of April, and it would have been 1996. I was sitting with my roommate, my best friend at the time, her name was Cresta, and we were in the lobby of our dorm room playing cards. We didn't feel like going to bed. It was probably like 10 p.m. We probably should have gone to bed. You know, now I'm a mom. So like the whole perspective shift has happened where I'm like, why wasn't I in bed? But it was after 10 and we were playing cards in the lobby of the dorm, and a friend of a friend, I don't even really remember who it was, came through and stopped, and he looked at us and he's like, you guys want to go to a desert party? And I'd never even heard of a desert party, but I looked at my friend and I was like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. So we got a few friends together and we piled into this car and just started driving. Of course, I wasn't terribly familiar with Southern California. So you go out the 10, you start up the 15. I forget exactly where this particular party was, but that was generally the direction that you headed for these things. And the way it worked, of course, pre-cell phone, pre-GPS, all these kinds of things, is that you had to know someone who knew someone who knew someone, and you called them and they would give you these very specific directions. So you have your little piece of paper and you're driving out into the desert in the middle of the night. And it says, you know, pass mile marker 92, go 2.2 miles and turn right. So you're driving and there's literally nothing. You just turn off the highway onto this dirt road, just basically just ruts in the desert. And then the next road, okay, reset odometer, drive 1.8 miles and go left. And it's like even less of a road. And then you're like right, left. And I mean, you could spend an hour out on these tiny little roads. So going, and then you start to see other cars. So that's usually a sign you should find somewhere to park where you won't get too stuck in the sand. And then you get out and you walk, you know, your backpack, and you got your water, and you start walking without even really knowing where you're going. And then you would inevitably kind of round around some big either cliff or rock formation. And I pulled together some photos I could share with you guys. So let me pull up. So you would eventually you'd walk around and you'd come upon something like this. Now, this, of course, was taken in the daytime. So you have to imagine it at night. And there's like Christmas lights and all the dancers have glow sticks. And there are these giant towers of speakers. I don't know if you can see those. And the DJ booth would be somewhere in here. And then back there somewhere is a generator to power it all. But it's this huge party in the middle of nowhere. And you dance until dawn. And then the sun would come up. Let's see if I got some more photos here. So I was floored by how much, first of all, when you get there in the dark, it doesn't even seem dark because it's a full moon. They almost always did these parties on full moons. You didn't need a flashlight. You know, people would bring different like dancing things. Like you can see someone in the middle here is like dancing with like a fire spinner thing. And sometimes there were fires, like a fire pit, but you didn't even really need one in the desert except for maybe like December, January. And it was so beautiful. And the dancing was so much fun. And I loved the music. And then as the sun started to come up, you start to see the outlines of people like climbing up to these high spots in the desert to watch the sunrise, and the colors would slowly emerge. And you just, I don't know, you dance and dance until it got too hot to dance. And then you would pack it in and you would go home. And I was immediately hooked. So this is a picture of my friend John and my other friend Mari. This is us. He has a big van, so we would often go out in his van to go to parties. He was actually a DJ at some of these parties, so he was always fun to go out with. This is me right here going out to, I think this was us leaving one of the parties. This is Cream. He actually ended up being best man at my wedding. were like my nearest and dearest friends, and we would go out every full moon, regardless of what our class schedule was the next day. We just, we went. It was like the full moon called, there was dancing to be done, and we went out to the desert. And looking at the data, I found this one online, but April of 95, oh, this would have been the year before I went. So not the one that I went to, but you'll see like people set up tents. People would go hiking. Like again, when the sun started to come up, you'd see silhouettes of people hiking up to high points to watch the sunrise. This is me eating pancakes with whipped cream at sunrise in the desert. And I just started to really fall in love with the beauty of the desert. Those of you who've read the book know that the marigolds make an appearance in the story. These beautiful, just sweeping vistas of the Mojave. And the Mojave is just, it's a little bit different than most desert. It's not that sandy Sahara thing, or these weird, they almost look like turtles popping up out of the ground, just unlike anything I'd known. And then I started to notice the details of the beautiful flowers and the subtle things, the way that on a windy night, when you walked far enough away from the music to use the bathroom, the wind you would notice made the branches squeak in the middle of the night. And first time you hear it, you're like, what was that? It's so weird. And you realize it's actually the branches blowing in the wind and making their own music. This is Cassie. We've been best friends for over 20 years, sitting on top of a rock at sunrise. Yeah. So just, that's me and Cassie again. So the shadows get really long at sunrise. I love that. It's one of my favorite things about being out in the desert, is playing with the shadows in the morning. And then if you were lucky and you got some cloud cover on your way out, this is what the roads looked like, these long, straight. And then, you'd get to a mile marker and be like, turn right. And they're just not, they're hardly even roads. They're just dirt. And you did have to be pretty careful about getting stuck. It happened sometimes. But that's what I have in terms of my little photo slideshow there. So I haven't ever shared that with any other group. I thought it would be kind of a fun little insight. That was how I fell in love with the desert. So flash forward about a decade, and I'm living, my husband and I've moved back up to Northern California. I met my husband, got married. I'm pregnant. We are living in student housing at Stanford while he's finishing up his master's degree. And the plan is that we're going to move down to Los Angeles when he's done with school. And so I did a little bit of temp work, but I wasn't trying too hard to find a job since we knew we were moving. And I had a lot of free time. And I found that when I was left to my own devices, what I did was write stories. I started writing these short stories for no reason. They weren't very good. Looking back, they were good first attempts, but it was the first time I had this inkling of like, maybe I could do this. Maybe this could be something that I do. And so when we moved down to Southern California after my husband graduated from grad school, I applied to USC into their Master's of Professional Writing program and got in, and I went and studied for 2 years. My daughter was 1 year old when I started, and when I graduated, I was 6 months pregnant with my second. So there was also a lot of like human making in the mix at this point in my life. And the very first draft of Ostriches was what I turned in for my thesis project, though it was unrecognizable as like the novel that it would become. The main reason for that is that I just didn't know what I wanted it to be. Again, I had this instinct to write. I was like, I'm gonna write a novel. And I did. I banged out 300 plus pages, but they were also kind of a hot mess. I only knew two things for sure. The first was that I wanted to set it in the desert because I had that love for the desert. And the second was that I knew I could pull, oh, here's my son. Sweetie, I'm in the middle of something. Okay, I'll be out in a little bit. Will you close the door, please? Sebastian, will you close the door, please? Where was I? Sorry, this happens in the world of COVID and Zoom. You'd think I'd be used to it by now, but anyway. Hi, Ann. Okay, so I knew two things. I wanted to set it in the desert, and the second thing I knew I wanted to do was pull from my mom's life story. My mom had a fairly dramatic childhood. She was born in Oakland to a woman who was a fantastic grandmother, I loved her. She was the best grandmother, but by all accounts was not a very good mom. You know, she drank a lot, she gambled, she had boyfriends when her husband was away. Like it was not a very good environment for small children. And my mom had 2 younger siblings. And when she was 13, she went to live on the family farm outside of Sacramento. And it was pretty dramatic. When she got there, her grandmother said to her, "Everyone works around here. You want to work inside or outside?" And my mom had seen the horses on her way in, and she said, "Outside, I want to ride the horses." And so she was put to work outside. She had 8 uncles who had never really left home and basically made her life hell. They were fairly abusive. And the stories that she told me over the years, I just decided that, like, this would be really good material to start to put into a story. It's very dramatic. So I called my mom and I said, "I'm thinking of, pulling some of the details from your stories on the farm, but I want to set it in the desert. Is there any chance that there'd be a dairy farm in the desert?" And I think she laughed out loud. I think she was like, no way. And I was feeling kind of stubborn. So I was Googling like ranch, Mojave, just trying to see what would come up. And I came across the OK Corral Ostrich Farm, which was in the Mojave up until I think it was 2016. But at the time, so this would have been like 2010, early 2010. And I contacted the guy who owned it and I said, "Hey, can I come out and have a tour of your ranch?" I just kind of, I was toying with the idea. It's like, it's a ranch. Maybe I can make this work. I pitched it as a travel idea. So I went out there with the assignment of writing a travel piece about this ostrich farm that you could visit. And the guy, Doug Osborne was his name, sole proprietor. It was just him out there alone on the farm with all of his birds, which he knew every one of them by name. And I think he was a little lonely because I had thought like, he'll give me a quick tour and then he'll probably boot me out. We ended up talking for hours. He walked me around the whole property, telling me stories. Here, I have a video I want to share of him too. Doug actually passed away. So that was when the farm was dismantled, but he was a really nice gentleman and was very generous with his time. These are the birds. This is the farm. They're enormous. They're fairly terrifying.
Right? See the eyes? They're big. They have a double eyelid, and it goes back and forth. And up, the first one's up and down, the second one's back and forth. And because they come from the desert, they're a desert bird.
And that's basically how we spent like the whole afternoon just walking around, and he was telling me ostrich trivia and he had told me about things that had happened on the farm. And by the time I left that day, I had the travel story, that was easy, but I immediately started going home and putting my mom's stories on this ranch. And then it was interesting how it shifted when it started to become more of a story I wanted to tell. I went out multiple times to visit with Doug, probably 3 or 4 times over the course of maybe 2 years. And again, I would like buy him lunch and then he would just tell me stories about ranching ostriches and the mistakes that he made and, things you have to know. And as I started writing the story, I think the most significant change that happened was that it started to become much more female centric. So it started with all these uncles and Grandpa Hank, who had picked her up from the farm, from Oakland, to take her back to the ranch. And Grandpa Hank became Grandma Helen, and Uncle Chris became Aunt Christine, and the cousins became they're all girls in the story. Like it's just became this like very female centric story. And only on reflection years later did I realize like that was really me starting to tell my story instead of my mom's. Because my upbringing was very female centric, matriarchal in the extreme. I had one boy cousin and that was it. Like my dad wasn't really in the picture. Uncles had all taken off. It was like me, my sister, my mom, my aunt, my cousins, even my best friend's dad wasn't in the picture. Like there were no men in my upbringing at all that I remember or related to in any significant way. So it just became a much more female story, which felt right to me. And slowly but surely, as I changed the plot points in the story to be things that Doug had told me about. For those of you who haven't read, I don't want to give it away, but I directly pulled a number of the plot points in my story directly from things that he told me had happened on his watch with the farm. So Slowly but surely, it became more and more my story, less and less my mom's story. But there is one snippet in the book that is still my mom's story. And I thought I might read that little bit since it's a flashback in the story. I always struggle with doing readings because I don't want to give away anything. And I get tired of reading the first 3 pages. But there is a flashback in the story where Grandma Helen shows up on the doorstep in Oakland. And this is the only bit that still remains of my mom's story. So I'm going to read this little excerpt. It starts around page 50. I remembered when I first saw her when I was 13 through the peephole in the door of my mother's Oakland apartment. She was a thin woman with gray hair pulled into a low ponytail. Her narrow face, distorted by the fisheye glass, had looked unnaturally stretched. Her lips cut a pale line above her square chin. A series of deep wrinkles lined her forehead and traced down to encase her deep-set blue eyes. She wore jeans and a white button-up shirt tucked in behind a large silver belt buckle. Even before I knew who she was, I knew she didn't belong in Oakland. She peered nervously down the hall to her left, then back at the door. She seemed downright ancient to me that day, but then when I was 13, anyone over 20 counted as old. She looked surprised to see me when I opened the door, but recovered quickly. You must be Tallulah, she said, holding out her hand. I'm your Grandma Helen. Her hand was strong, the skin surprisingly smooth. Her thin lips spread upward and an easy smile. It's nice to meet you. She asked for a glass of water, so I showed her in and filled one from the tap. On the kitchen table, my cornflakes crackled in their milk. I wondered if I should offer her food, but then the door to my mom's room swung open and she emerged, dreadlocks sticking out in every direction. An oversized Raiders t-shirt hung almost to her knees. Her eyes, blurry with sleep, were circled with charcoal shadow that had smeared unevenly in the night. Hello, Laura, Grandma Helen said. My mom put her hand on the wall. She'd had a late night and she'd brought someone home with her. I'd heard them stumble through the door around 4. What the hell are you doing here? She demanded. Why don't we sit down, Grandma Helen said, motioning to the round table where my breakfast sat, turning soggy. My mom wiped at her nose with the back of her wrist and sniffed. I gotta take a piss, she said, and slipped into the bathroom. I gave up on breakfast and waited in silence with Grandma Helen. She sat with her shoulders squared, her back perfectly straight, taking in the disarray that was our apartment. When my mom finally appeared again, she'd washed her face and pulled her dreadlocks together with a rubber band. Grandma Helen rose to her feet. I'd have come later. I know you're not exactly a morning person, but I'm hoping to get home before dark. My mom slumped into the chair beside me, pulling up one knee under her gigantic nightshirt. Whatever, she said, cupping her forehead in her hand and peering sideways at her mother. Why are you here? Grandma Helen sat and resumed her perfect posture. Well, there's just no easy way to say it, so here it is. She cleared her throat. I'm taking the girl to live with me on the ranch. You can come too if you want. And that last line is a direct quote. That was what my mom remembers her grandfather saying, I'm taking the girl to live with me on the ranch. You can come too if you want. So that's that line is like a little memorial to my mom, who inspired at least the start of the story, if not what ended up in the actual pages. So let's see here, what else? I was going to share one of the biggest compliments I get when people read the book is that they ask if I was raised on an ostrich ranch. And I definitely was not, but I consider it quite a compliment of a question. I have, in the course of the last decade, learned a lot about ostriches, and I thought it would be fun to share a few ostrich trivia facts with you guys. The first fun fact is that Johnny Cash was almost killed by an ostrich once. Apparently he was on a ranch on a rehab stint later in his life, and he went for a walk, and this ostrich came up to him and started posturing, and he didn't really understand that the ostrich was posturing and being territorial, so he didn't leave like he should have. And the birds have these crazy legs that bend forward and these big claws, so they jump and they gut you with the claws like that. And so this bird flutters up and cuts him from sternum straight down, but he had a giant silver belt buckle on because he's Johnny Cash. And I guess you wear that every day if you're Johnny Cash. And so saved his life. The belt buckle did, kept his guts from falling out all over the place, but he had to have surgery to heal the cut along his belly where the bird almost killed him. Another bit of trivia is birds are not as stupid as we thought they were. For a long time, the insult of bird brain. After the book was published, which is actually great because I would have had to do a lot of rewriting. After the book was published, there was a report that came out that birds are actually quite intelligent, and that we've just laid the mammalian bias over the brain structure of birds for all these many, many decades and hundreds of years. If you remove the mammalian bias of that it should look like our brain and it's really small, it actually is just really compact and really compactly wired, which makes sense because birds, most of them, not ostriches, but they're meant to fly, right? Their bones are hollow. They have adaptations to make them more compact and lighter weight. So they're actually not as dumb as once thought. Fun bit of trivia. I don't know if you guys may know this one already, but there used to be a very famous ostrich farm in Pasadena. And I pulled up an old news clipping of this to show you guys. I love this. The Pasadena Ostrich Farm. It was huge. It was a huge ostrich fan. It was actually like, I've heard it called the Disneyland of Southern California before Disneyland happened. So like you could go and they would tow like little carriages behind the ostriches and give you ostrich rides. They had stuffed ostriches that you could pose for pictures with. It was like, apparently it was a really big deal. And this article talks about how it was getting so popular, they had to actually put a train rail past it and put a train stop there for people who were visiting because it was getting so out of hand how many people were coming. And then just to give a sense of it modern day. So here's, Dodger Stadium, Pasadena's up here. It's right in here where the 110 gets all curvy. Let me scoot in on this a little. And if you go there, there's a little plaque on the corner of the street that commemorates the Pasadena Ostrich Farm. And the only thing that still remains is the, there's an office building there now. And in homage to the history of the place, there's one of the businesses in there is the Ostrich Farm Studio. It's a photo studio. And that's actually where I did my book launch party, just for the fun of being somewhere where there used to be ostriches. They do not put their heads in the sand, which most people know at this point, but still it's good for comedy. I love, someone gave me this. I don't know if you can read that. It says, all right, what do you really think of Ian? It's like the birds gossiping. People give you things with ostriches on them when you write a book about ostriches. Just charming. I have like, my neighbor gave me my little like to-do notepad. I have ostriches everywhere now. I think that's it for trivia. Oh, they grow to their full size in 1 year. They go from like the ostrich egg, they hatch about this big, and 1 year later, they're 9 feet tall. They grow super fast and they're really scary. I never did actually get in the corral with any of them. I just watched. I would say maybe someday, but I doubt it. I think I'm done. Okay, so let's see. I can talk a little bit about the actual publishing journey, or I could segue into talking a little bit more about the mindful writing group that I've put together, or we can go ahead and open up to questions. I'm not sure what people would most like to hear about. Does anyone want to chime in?
Well, I think your writing process and how you got involved and how you published your book, being your very first book.
Yeah.
How you got involved with that.
Okay, we can do that story for sure. Yeah, so I mentioned that when I graduated, I was pregnant with my son and I had a little girl, and I was very lucky to actually find a job with a writing degree. So I was working in marketing, and so I was working full-time with 2 small kids and refused to give up this goal of finishing my novel. So I would get up at 4:50 every morning and I would write until the first child woke up. That was pretty much and then I'd have to close the laptop and do my day. And I was exhausted, all the time exhausted. And I wrote and rewrote and rewrote. And again, I just didn't really know what I wanted the story to be. It kept changing, right? I kept changing the plot points. And about halfway through, I vowed I would never write another novel without outlining. I just didn't know what I was doing. So it took a long time to figure out what I wanted it to be. And actually, I had a moment at a writing conference, had this aha moment where the lecturer was talking about, what is your story about? What's one? And and I was like, this is not for me. And then I had this out of nowhere light bulb moment was writing a story about a character who needed to pull her head out of the sand and like turn and face her problems. And I was like, oh my God, I've been writing a book for 8 years about a woman who needs to pull her head out of the sand, and I didn't even realize, and I said it on an Ostrich ranch. So I had that revelation. I went home, and then it just all kind of fell into place. It was all kind of there, and I just cut certain things. I finally knew what I wanted it to be. So I finished a draft that I was happy with in December of 2017. And all the time I'd been writing that, I'd been collecting names of agents I thought would be good for the book I was trying to write. You can do that whenever you read a book that you like, you go to the acknowledgements in the back, and they always thank their agent. So whenever I read a book that I thought was similar to mine, flip to the back, find the agent's name, look them up, see if they're accepting queries. And I made this spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets. And I had it in order of like, this is my dream agent, and then like top 5, top 10. And my plan was to send out 5 query letters. And then just when one rejection came in, I would just send out number 6. The next rejection, I'd send out number 7. I was just going to try to keep 5 in rotation at all times, knowing that there would be rejection. That was going to be part of it. So the very first agent on my list, his name was Joel Gottler, and I sent it to him, sent him 2 pages, and he said, sounds interesting, send me the manuscript. Like almost immediately, the same day, he said, sounds interesting, send me the manuscript. So I sent him the manuscript, and like 3 days later, he said, I want to rep this. And he signed me like days after I queried him. And I was in shock, like that doesn't happen, that never happens. And I was over the moon, I was so excited. And then the waiting began. Because there will always be rejection in writing, where maybe it didn't come there, it's in the mail. So he started taking it out. I did a few little revisions at his suggestion, not a lot, but some. And then he started shopping it around, and it just could not find a home. Like one editor would say, love the characters, but not the story. And then the next editor would say, like, I love the story, but the characters feel flat. It just wasn't landing anywhere. And I asked him at one point, after like 30 rejections, should I rewrite? What should we do? And he said, if we were getting the same feedback over and over, I'd have you rewrite, but we're not. It just needs to find its home. And it got to Kensington. Kensington generally publishes romance, cozy mysteries, things that can be more easily serialized. They don't do a lot of literary fiction, but their head editor gets to choose one literary title a quarter. That's just kind of his pet project. And he really liked the book. So they took it on, and I worked with him. That was mid-year 2018. And they said, it'll come out in 2020. And I was like, that's so far. But they wanted it to be a spring book. Apparently farm books sell better in the spring. And they already had their slate for 2019. So it had to go on the 2020 slate. So I had this 1.5 years to kind of sit and wait for it to come out. And I started on book number 2. So book number 2 is actually the book I wanted to write for my first book, but I knew I didn't have the chops, and I was right. I think if I had tried to write this book, the one that's sitting in manuscript form, like right now on my desk, I don't think I ever would have finished it. This book is a really simple, straight through, it's a single point of view, first person, 1 week, linear timeline, a couple of little flashbacks, but generally speaking, a very straightforward structure, nothing complicated or crazy. This new book, it spans 250 years. It's got historical elements. So like writing the research on those, and then it's got magic realism. It's got 2 different points of view. I never would have finished it if I had tried to make that my first book. And I'm thankful for that instinct to wait and try to write a simpler story first, and then tackle the one that was a juicier but more enticing story. So I worked on that. And then my book launch party was in it's the end of February 2020. I got to do a couple of events, and then everything shut down, which actually just gave me more time to work on the new novel. So it all works out in the end.
Thank you very much to share your story with us. It's absolutely fascinating. I think we all learned a lot, or I did, about ostriches. I didn't know that at all. I thought it was interesting that the Pasadena ranch, when you read that, they actually bought their ostriches from South America or South Africa. So yeah. Is that normally they come from, or how did they get out in this desert out here in California.
They are native to South Africa, so they almost all come from there originally. But the feather business was a really big business. Pre-World War I, hats all had big feathers. But then when the war came, it was very hard for feathers to get out of South Africa because of all the boat warfare that was happening. And then cars came along, and big hats didn't fit in cars. And so the fashion changed, and people no longer wore big feathers in their hat. And so ostriches became more of a novelty. I mean, you used to make a lot of money off an ostrich feather. They were 30 bucks a piece back in the day, they were 30 bucks a piece. It was good money if you could keep the ostriches alive and harvest the feathers without getting beat up by an ostrich. Yeah.
Well, they used to have fans out of them too. I remember seeing ostrich fans. And then if you were a debutante in England presented to the queen or the king, you had those 3 big feathers. And then you had a picture of yourself with the big feathers. And then everybody knew you had been presented. Were those ostrich feathers?
I'm not familiar with that tradition.
Huge, big white ones. They look very much like the feathers on the cover of your book. I really need to look that up. It hadn't occurred to me until right now, but I bet they were ostrich feathers. So if anyone has any chat questions, please put them in the chat. It's a fascinating story how you shared going out to the desert and falling in love with the desert during your college years at Scripps. That must have been absolutely beautiful out there.
It was. It really was.
See that and see the sunrise. And the first time you went, it was probably a very surreal experience because you just didn't know what was going to happen. And then you shared with us the story about the rancher. How would it be what you have at the back of your book, these wonderful discussion questions? And one of them is, how would it be different if it was your story, if it was a different type of a ranch? If you had chosen a cattle ranch or a chicken ranch?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main reasons I went with Ostrich Ranch I explained the main reasons, but I was also frankly just intimidated to try to do a kind of ranch that people are more familiar with. I mean, dairy ranching is a thing that people do. There's not a lot of ostrich ranches. And so it took a lot of the pressure off getting it right. I mean, I did a lot of research. I did get it right because that's just who I am, but it felt like taking the pressure off of it. To try to write a dairy farm without ever having really stepped foot on a dairy farm was way intimidating. And I think it would be, I mean, if you're talking about a dairy farm, you're talking about mammals. And I feel like humans have a different relationship with mammals than they do with, say, birds, chickens, ostriches, whatever it may be. Though that's not true for everyone. In fact, I could share when I went out to the farm. Yeah, here, I'll share this. And the first time I went out, if you guys have read the book, there's one bird that wanders the ranch unencumbered. Her name is Abigail. And this is Abigail. She's just wandering around the ranch. The Doug, who ran the place, treated her like a cat or a dog. She had a broken ankle that never healed right, so she couldn't walk very fast. And she was like a pet. To him, like a mammal, like I would treat a dog. So I don't know if that's universally true, but I think generally true. It's different if you're dealing with mammals. There was also for a while, the ranch that I based it on was a meat and leather ranch. And one of the feedback bits I got from a reader about halfway through the process of writing it was that it's very hard to be empathetic for this character who's trying to save the birds when they're just going to go to slaughter. And that was when I decided to make it an egg ranch. So again, and that's really edging on the plausibility. It's plausible. I ran the numbers. It's possible you could run an egg farm only, but most ostrich farms are run for meat and leather. So in some ways that's more like a dairy farm, I suppose. I don't know that they use the hides at dairy farms, but I'm kind of rambling. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So what do they eat?
Well, out in the wild, they're pretty omnivorous, so they'll eat bugs and grains and whatever they find that, and they inevitably ingest a little bit of sand as they peck things up, which their system is designed to kind of use the sand to help them digest, which I think is interesting. On the farm, they eat like alfalfa pellets. It's just like bird food, basically.
Okay, so then somebody wants to know about your Buddhist practice and how it intersected along with your writing.
Yeah, so one of the, looking back on my writing and when it really started to come together for me, it was not coincidentally when I started to get more serious about my meditation practice. And that that happened around 2016. I started meditating regularly. I actually took a class where the teacher was a little militant, which was kind of what I needed at the time. We logged on every morning for a 25-minute meditation. You were not to miss class. If you did, you had to watch the recording later. We met twice a month to talk about different lessons in Buddhism and mindfulness. And I just got much more serious about the practice. And as I did, I started to become more aware of myself and my writing. I became more aware of emotions and how, if you want to write, and Barbara's I'm repeating myself, Barbara, bear with me. Barbara's actually taking a class of mine called the 6-week Mindful Writer Challenge. And I talk a lot about these ideas of, if you want to write an emotion in a true way, you have to not only be able to touch into it, but stay with it long enough to describe it and get it on the page. And most of us don't like feeling bad emotions. And a story without a challenging emotion isn't a very interesting story. So at some point in your story, someone's going to have their feelings hurt at the very least, if not a lot worse. So if you've read the book, it gets a lot worse than hurt feelings. You have to be able to touch into like senses of abandonment, or for my story, that was the theme of abandonment, and being able to touch into that and not only feel it, that really uncomfortable feeling, but stay with it enough to be like, okay, it feels like this is, and get it on the page. So that was a huge help in mindfulness and just that awareness of the emotion and being able to stay with it. It also did wonders in helping me to address my inner critic, which allows me to write first drafts a lot faster now. So just in the practice of mindfulness, I treat the writing like meditation, where I'm writing and I notice the thought come up of like, well, that was a terrible sentence. Okay, thank you for your opinion. And I just keep writing. And then the voice pipes up again, like, oh, you should probably delete that. That was no good. Okay, thank you for your opinion, and just keep writing. And it's been a total game changer, and just accepting that your first draft is going to be bad. At least for me, first drafts are not good. And I think that's true for 99% of writers. And I think the other 1% are lions. So the first draft is going to be gross. And then you go back and then you let that critic, you bring that critic in, you intentionally invite the critic in, and then you just go to town on it. Once you have the draft, then you get harsh with yourself. Then you get really critical. You bring in your grammar nerd and you bring in your, just be as hard as you can on yourself for that second draft or all the editing drafts. And that's how you hone it and refine it and take it from a crappy first draft to something that you're willing to show somebody.
So how many drafts did you do for this book?
I mean, I kind of lost track. I think about 18.
Oh, about 8. Oh, wow.
It was a lot. I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And it wasn't until about 2016. And again, when this mindfulness practice came in, where I just kind of I slowed down. I got a better sense of what I wanted to do. I got more serious about committing to my craft. I started to be realistic about the things that I was not good at. I mean, I'm still a terrible editor. That's why I hire an editor, because I am the typo queen. I just don't catch them. So now I know that about myself, and I hire someone. I mean, even before I send it to my agent, I pay an editor. So my agent thinks I'm a great editor. But then to come back to the mindfulness, you mentioned in the introduction about the group that I started during the pandemic with a friend of mine who's also a writer and a meditator. We started a group called A Very Important Meeting. And this idea that we often, as writers, we put off our writing, our other meetings get in the way, or other family commitments or whatever it may be. And we had this idea that if we put it on there's a calendar and you click on it and you sign up for the Zoom, and then it pops up on your calendar as a very important meeting. and you have to go. It's your very important meeting. And we start each meeting with a 10-minute meditation just to quiet our minds. And then we write in silence for 45 minutes. And then we just hang out and chat for 10, 15 minutes or as long as folks want to. And it's been such a touchstone for me through the pandemic when we're feeling really isolated, unable to get together with people in person, having a lot of trouble focusing. And I know I was not alone in that, like trying to write in the midst of the pandemic was hard, continues to be challenging in some aspects. My kids go back to school on Monday and I'm so excited for them and for me, because like, I don't even know what I'm going to do with myself having a quiet house for like 6 hours a day. I've forgotten what it's like. So anyways, the very important meeting was a wonderful way to carve out at least 45 minutes every day. I worked on my novel a little bit and I did my meditation and I talked with friends, and it's been great. And it's expanded since then. We're now doing 15 meetings a week. We have 5 teachers all in. There's 5 of us. We're all trained meditation teachers and professional writers. So this is what we do. And it's been great. Everybody's welcome, by the way. If there's any writers out there in the group who want to come, it's a veryimportantmeeting.com.
So you just go to veryimportantmeeting.com.
Yeah.
And join. Is there a fee or?
No, we do ask if people can to contribute $5, but it's, we understand that as writers, we don't always have extra money. So if you can throw in $5, if not, you're absolutely welcome nonetheless. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful opportunity for everyone that wants to start to write. So where are you with your new book that you're writing now? Are you ready to give it to your editor? Or
I thought I was so close. And then my husband read it and he had this really great idea about the middle of the book. And I was like, damn it. So now I have to go back and write this it really is like, it's a good idea and it's worth taking the time to make the changes, but I am feeling a little impatient because I thought it was done. It's very close to done. And I think once I make these edits to the middle section, and I'll probably read it through one more time and then send it to the editor and then to the agent. And
will you use the same agent?
I am not entirely certain. We will see on that one. So what I learned about my agent is that he's actually more of a film rights agent. He did great by my book. I have no complaints, but I am interested in kind of talking to some other agents who are more literary market focused rather than film rights focused, because it is just a different take on the industry. So I may have some other conversations before moving forward. I'm not sure.
Oh, because then a film editor, they actually then write a script from your book.
Right.
Then to make it into a film. So,
yeah. And where that got a little muddy is that my husband is a filmmaker. And so he wrote the script and I love it. And so we didn't really need like a film rights editor, which then left my agent kind of in the lurch, which I just didn't really understand the difference between a film rights agent and a literary agent. I thought they were kind of the same thing and they're not. So I understand the industry better now than I did when I was first sending out my query letters, and that may change how I would go about it in the future.
Okay, so you've had a fascinating journey, fascinating, very and wonderful program. Very, very interesting, everything that you've shared with us. So does anyone else have any questions that you want to ask April about her book or about the ostriches? So I do remember the Pasadena hearing about that. I've seen a postcard from the ostrich ranch. It was, as you said, very, very popular, a big tourist attraction in Pasadena. Yeah. So what happened? Everything became just overdeveloped and there was no place to have them, or where did all those birds go?
Well, I imagine they took a financial blow when the feathers were no longer the big sellers that they were. Right. And then I would imagine that not too long after that, the land became more valuable because it's Pasadena and LA is growing, and they probably just sold the land for whatever they could get for it, which was probably significant. I don't know. I don't really know the story of how it ended.
How it ended.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting historic part of Pasadena. So how do you find a first reader, someone wants to know, short of having a husband who's a screenwriter?
Yeah. My husband is, he's like my secret weapon. He's really good with plot, right? Because he thinks in terms of screenplay. So he always is really good at catching things. Aside from my husband, I choose my first readers based on what the story is. So like with this book, it has Native American characters, and a friend of mine from college is in the Ojibwe tribe. And so I asked her to read it first, just as almost like a sensitivity reader. It also has an intensely Catholic character. So I asked my intensely Catholic friend to read it, make sure that I got the details right on that, because I am not Catholic by any stretch. So I try to choose someone who is a friend and who is a reader. I made the mistake in an early draft of sharing it with someone, shared it with my dad. My dad is a writer and a voracious reader, but he never reads fiction. He's a nonfiction war memoir guy. Like he's working on his third memoir about flying helicopters in Vietnam. I absolutely respect him as a writer. So I sent him a draft, and it was really disappointing, his feedback. And it wasn't until I realized that, oh, he doesn't read fiction. Of course, like he was making suggestions like, maybe you need a sidebar here where you describe how ostriches eat. And I'm like, yeah, what? So making sure you choose someone who is a reader. They don't have to be in your genre, but somebody who like knows books and loves you and will be kind. And then also someone who, with the kindness, can make suggestions that will actually help. It's a fine line, and it's hard to find those people. But I feel like the more you hang out with writers in writer circles and libraries, you meet more book lovers. And so they become easier to find as you go along. These days, I feel like I don't have any trouble finding first readers.
Well, that's good. Well, you've presented such an absolutely wonderful program for us today. And I know everyone is looking forward to your new book. When do you anticipate that it might come out?
Well, my hope is that I will have it to my agent by the end of the year, whether it's this agent or another. And then it really just depends on how long it takes to find a home, right? I mean, I would love for it to get snapped up right away. And they're like, we have to get this to market right away. And then it would come out. I set the final chapter of the book in 2022 with like fingers crossed that it would come out next year. But it may be one of those things where it takes a while to find a home. And then they're like, well, we already have our 22 slate. And so this will be a 23 book, but it's just really hard to know. I would love for it to be next year. We'll see.
Well, we hope for you that it is next year, and we'll all look forward to it. And we thank you very much for sharing your fascinating story with us, and your story about the book. I'm sure everybody, if you haven't read it, you want to read it. And also, I want to remind you that there are wonderful discussion questions at the end of the book. So it is a great book for a book club, because you have these very detailed, very thought-provoking questions already right there for you. So remember, it's in the Pasadena Public Library. You can check it out, or you can go to Vroman's bookstore. And we thank you so much, April, for being part of our Authors and Their Journey series.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat.
Thank you very, very much. And thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you
very much. So look forward to joining our other programs about authors and their journeys. I'll look forward to welcoming you then. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.